I hope you're well. In this one, I'm making a small stool just as a kind of proof of concept. This came about from a question in the 10-minute workshop plus forums from plus member Catherine, who was looking for some ideas for a small stool that her grandchildren could use, but also one that was still big enough and robust enough for the adults to perch on occasionally. Now, I've had a simple stool project on the go for about a year or so. This was put on a bit of a back burner while a big building project was going on over last summer. Those videos will be starting to come through fairly soon, by the way, so keep your eyes peeled for those. But the stool is a pretty simple sort of A-frame construction joined by rails. This one has a fold-down step, so you keep the overall footprint small when you don't need it, but the simple A-frame really does lend itself well to being made smaller. In terms of height, I went for a 400mm stool for the small one, about 16 inches overall. That's the height of most toilet bowls, and we seem to manage okay with those, but the design is easy to adapt to other sizes if you need something a little bit different, and easy to make from whatever sheet materials you have to hand or can get easily. I have a janky, slightly bent piece of 18mm birch-faced poplar plywood that I'm ripping into 42mm wide strips. 42mm because it's easy to centre an 18mm thick board using a scrap of 12mm. And then the next 20 minutes or so are spent just cutting everything to length really carefully and making sure that the two frames will be absolutely identical. This is fiddly, painstaking work, but well worth taking your time over. I don't have plans for this, I'm sort of making it up as I go along, but if I find time I'll put a fact sheet together with the basic dimensions on it and I'll add that to the newsletter. The only critical thing that took me a little while to get just right is the angle of the A-frame, which turned out to be a slightly weird 96 degrees. So with everything cut, I'm joining the frames with dominoes because I have one and they're quick and easy, but the joints can be made any way you like with dowels, or there are lots of ways to make fake joints with sheet materials. Because this is a thinly veneered board, I want to keep the sanding to a minimum, so I've added tape to the joints and then put my pencil marks onto the tape, keeping the lines square to the edge of the legs. Then I can cut through the tape to separate the pieces and get the mortises cut. I'm using my usual 5x30mm dominoes, tight setting on the angled ends of the rails and mid setting on the legs. And with the machining done, I can get these glued up. Note I'm using the trimmed angle ends of the legs and rails to give the clamps a square end to bear against. With the frames and clamps set aside, I can cut the connecting rails to length using the fibracolour seat as a gauge, just allowing for a 9mm overhang on each side and the thickness of both rails. I don't actually know what size this is, and to be honest, it really doesn't matter as long as it fits and it looks right. With the rails cut to length and clamped onto the apron of the bench, I'm marking up the centre of each end and then drilling a 5mm hole with a drill block, helping to keep everything true. Doing it this way means that the bulk of the drill block is flat on the bench top, which is much easier than trying to balance it on the end of each rail. Oh, and that's a 5mm hole because I'll be using Conformat screws for this. I tend only to use these when the head is visible, as they look a bit less screw-like than a posi. With the glue set and the frames out of the clamps, I can mark the drilling positions to attach the rails, and I'm using an offcut of the rail against a 12mm scrap to centre it on the leg, and then finding the rail centre with diagonals in the usual way. And with the frames clamped together firmly on the bench, I can drill them through at the same time. I'm using the drill block with a 6mm bit, and then opening them up with a 7mm bit that the Conformat screws need, as my drill block doesn't do 7mm. By the way, for finished work, I like to add a small countersink for the countermount screw, especially when I'm using a veneered board, as I find the thin commercial veneer really easy to crush and split. But with the holes drilled, it seems like a good time to give everything a very gentle sanding with some P120 and then get the frames screwed together with the rails. I'm adding a little handle cutout into the seat with a router, nice jig, and then just rounding over the edges. The seat is simply attached with a couple of screws, and I'm drilling through the top of the frame as there isn't space to get the drill in if I went the other way. Flip it over onto the seat on the bench and screw it down, and we can call this one done. So there we are, a simple little stool. Now from odds and ends, I'm going to leave it unfinished as it's just a test piece, proof of concept. But as that, I think it works really well. It'll make a nice little sidekick, of course, to the full-size bench when that full-sized stool, when that comes along a little bit later on. But I'll call this one done for this week. Thanks so much for taking a look. Thanks, of course, to the 10 Minute Workshop Plus members, and especially to Catherine for the original question. But yeah, all looking good. Really pleased with that. I'll catch you in the next one. Right, take care.